Hey, how we doing here? It's Don. I just thought I would answer some more questions, and at the end of this video I have a little insider coming out as well too. I bought a lot of some silks, and I'm going to explain that here at the end, as I said. So we'll go into that, you know, as a little separate segment of this same video here. I've got a few questions for those of you. If you're new, you're welcome to put questions in. I don't care where you put them at. In Patreon, I read every single post that comes up there, every single one. It may take me a day or so to get back to them, but I read every one. I actually print them all up as well too and keep them in a separate spot in a binder. So this way, if something happens, I always have, you know, complete information on discussed issues, questions. I do compile stuff like this together so that I know, you know, where people are having issues. It helps me to put videos together, believe it or not. Just like the comments and questions I get on YouTube. If you've seen some of my live shots and my other videos, I have a tablet with me all the time. I did it when I was a general manager in a regional, because you would walk through places and you would actually write down information. So I always have a tablet with me wherever I go, whatever I do. Even at auctions, I have a little pad in my pocket. If I'm at a live auction, a flea market, a antique mall, I'll actually write down booth numbers, maybe even a quick layout on which way to go to get to the booths that I know are the best until I remember them and by heart. So again, I keep track of everything. This is just how you do business. You know, maybe someone might think that's anal retentive, but for me it works. I'm not a typical person. I've got my own idiosyncrasies and, you know, ADD and all that kind of stuff. So for me, I do things differently than many other people would. Maybe it's overkill, but it always steers me in the right direction. So anyway, I've had some questions here. I'm going to address a few of the bigger ones here from some other folks in here. These are all Patreon-related questions only. I'm not going to do this ever on YouTube and answer stuff like this. Richard Johnson had some questions here, and I also had other members as well, and I get them on my YouTube. So I'm going to answer this question here on postcards. For the most part, I would never, ever, ever iron a postcard, at least if it's a real picture postcard. The real picture postcards, it's a chemical process that actually develops the film. In some cases, depending on how they actually did it too, things like getting it wet or spilling something on it or trying to clean it up will actually take off part of the actual image, depending on if they processed it correctly. Now again, some of the early real picture postcards could have been processed by Joe Schmo, who has very little experience. So sometimes you'll see the solarization on postcards as well, and that is when it has like a rainbow effect, like you see oil on top of water that has that glistening, reflective, multicolored rainbow effect on it, where you can't quite see the image on the postcard very well. To the best of my knowledge, I have not seen any way that will fix it completely. In some situations, there are some sprays that you can do, just like I do on fixing up the badly damaged cards. Even with postcards, you can spray a clear coat over them carefully. Again, you have to state that in there. Whenever you do something like this, state it in the listings. The item has been repaired. That has got to be 100% in the condition line. Don't get caught scamming something for a couple extra bucks. It's just not worth your reputation over anything else. So, but some of those solarizations can be somewhat, I guess, lessened with some of the sprays. If you haven't tried it, you don't know which ones to do, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it on an expensive card. I would take something that you've had laying around, like of a specific, like a family photo or something, first before you do it. You can't compare, though, a regular photograph that has that look to it, that's from that same age, to a postcard from the same age, because the processes to develop them may be different. Now, I've messed with this stuff for a long time. I've tried to repair certain things. Even as a kid, I would like help fill in or paint in covers to like comic books if they were damaged and things like that. So I've said this before, I'd love to have been like a restorer at a museum or something, but you know, there's just not many of those jobs around, and I don't know how gratifying it would have been doing the same thing over and over again. I'd love to do it once in a while, but you know, anyway, that's literally the biggest thing I can say on that. I don't mess with it. If something's stuck on a postcard or something, it's sold as is. Junk them out if that's what you have to do. Don't buy them if they're stuck or if there's junk on them or something, because for the most part you can't fix it all. Now, some cases when you're messing with postcards, you can scrape off very carefully. Like, let's say the black corners were still stuck to the very corner of the postcard. There's usually a little strip sitting there. Sometimes that gets stuck to by how they glued them in or when they glued them into the book. So some of that you can very carefully take an X-Acto blade, and I'll probably do another video on touching up more options to repair and do postcards in next month's video. Just because, again, I get a lot of questions on this. You've seen the other ones, so you know there are many ways to repair. A side note too, on the letter that I put back together piecewise with the rice paper, I'm actually going to have that listed here in January, so you'll get to see what it goes for and see why I did that. I would gather I'm going to get at least $50 out of either one of those. You know, it's worth spending 20-30 minutes to make an extra $50 on something most anybody else would have thrown away. So just keep that in mind. We went over some of the other items here. One of the other questions, I know this is Jilly Getty, and somebody else, I can't remember who the other person was, but somebody else had basically the same question. I get them on my YouTube channel as well, and even in Facebook, about illustrations from inside of books. Now, for the most part, if it's not an engraving, a steel or copper plate engraving, it's not worth a whole heck of a lot of money, and most of the time I won't mess with them. Now, there are some exceptions. Let's say you have an early copy of Alice in Wonderland that is, the book's damaged, the book's not worth anything. I would have cut the illustrations out and sold them as a lot of illustrations. Let's say the book in that condition may be worth $5 because it's so well damaged, there's pages missing, but you still have the illustrations. The illustrations would be better off selling as their own in a lot, not individually. You're not going to sell something like that. Let's say it's a 1910 copy of Alice in Wonderland. I have one here that's falling apart. I save it because I like the artwork, and I collect stuff like that to do my own. Alice in Wonderland, you can openly do the characters as a, it's public domain, basically. But at least the original ones used in the book that was published in the 1800s. Not the new version by Disney. Those are still copyrighted. But stuff like that will sell. You might get $20 for the illustrations out of something like that. The Wizard of Oz, Frank L. Baum books. Of course, you can sell the illustrations out of those almost every time you get them if the book is trashed out or not worth anything because it's missing a cover or missing a ton of pages. Partial books won't sell from my personal experience. All what's going to happen is you're going to sell the partial book with the illustrations in it to somebody else, and then they will take the illustrations out and then sell them to crafters and artists and reshooters and things like that that will do something with those illustrations, and they will make a profit off of it. So for the most part, I would sell stuff like that individually. Now, going back to books made before 1900 or books with engravings, actual engravings. Now, they have to be real engravings for you to make decent money. I've shown some in pretty much my last, I think 3 what sold on eBay videos, at least a couple of them from the 1830s. Now, the engravings themselves are done on a plate. So when that plate is smashed down into the paper that it is printed on, it leaves a border, an indentation, a sunken-in section where the actual artwork itself is. That's how you tell if it's an actual plate engraving. Some of the time, if it's done on, a certain type of paper, you can feel the engraving with your fingernail on that piece of paper. So there is a way sometimes to tell. Otherwise, with the Loope, you can tell, but if it's rag paper or stuff with high cloth content in the paper, which is mostly what is used in the 19th century, it might absorb into the paper and might not leave that big indentation that you can feel. You can feel it on money, though, because money is engraved as well, too. So that gives you an idea at least what to feel for. And early stamps, too, like American banknote stamps or something along that line. You can always feel the ink on the surface. So that is a way to know which ones are worth it. Or if you see that that impressed section in the center of it, it almost makes a clear white frame or light beige frame, whatever color the paper is. It's going to make a framework around the artwork that's raised above the artwork. That's how you tell. Now, there's other ones that you can sell that are worth some money, depending on it, like maps, for instance. Tipped-in maps in books and things will sell as well, too, if they're early and engraved. The better ones are always hand-tinted. Now, when you see an old geography book, most people don't think much of the book's all ripped up and damaged, cover off or something. I look at them all because, maybe 20% of them have engravings, if they're 19th century, 1800s or before, have them. they'll be hand tinted. They'll be even the huge like Platt style map books from a county, which we run into quite often. You can rip those up and sell individual county ones for decent money. You know, they show up even at government sales, your courthouse sale, or even a newspaper closing sale, or things like that. They do show up. They're not some absurd thing. We find them. Those huge books that are, you know, like 40 pounds, that are like that thick, and they are the size of a newspaper. Those show up too. We've seen them before. I spend money on them though, mind you. You know, they're a couple $100 even to buy, but you can even cut those up. You know, there's so many other things that you can cut up. I wouldn't necessarily mix up print ads with cutting out the illustrations. Those are two different aspects, two different prospects, and two different thought methods to use when you're doing those. So we're just thinking about the actual book illustrations and engravings in books. That's all I'm talking about now. Magazines and print ads I've talked about in other videos. Probably going to touch on them again to answer some more questions at another point, because I still get questions on it. I'll probably actually bring in some magazines and we'll cut them up in front of you. I'll show you my process to break them down, to remove them from the book as well too. So, because that has been brought up many times. I know I haven't touched it. There's just so many topics, and I try to broadly address questions. So here we're doing it very specifically to your specific needs, to the best of my ability at this point. So again, with Jilly's question here, if you find old books or magazines that have some really interesting content, steamships are always very good content to have with the illustrations. But again, a modern day 1920s book with a bunch of illustrations, and it's not going to be worth cutting up. It's just not. It's just no value in it. Other than the highly collected ones like Wizard of Oz, or as I said, Alice in Wonderland, or some fantasy piece like that. There is a huge broad spectrum of illustrations. Winnie the Pooh is another one. I'm usually able to sell Winnie the Pooh vintage ones in lots. It may take a couple books worth to get together, but again, I save stuff. I've got this 90-day plan, or even sometimes it might be a lot longer than that before I sell something. I've got boxes of stuff that I put aside, and then I just, you know, have a list of either what's in there or a mental image of what I've got there. So if I get another Winnie the Pooh book in, and I know I've got two others with illustrations I've already cut out, I'll cut those illustrations out, and maybe I've got enough now to put a lot together to sell. Winnie the Pooh, original, vintage illustrations, first edition illustrations, whatever they're from. You put some nice, you know, broad descriptors up at the top on your title for it. Keywords. Don't be specific. Let them want to know what you are actually selling to get into your listing. Don't let them just window browse and window shop and not even look inside. You want to limit your information on stuff like that to get them in there, because a lot of people may not be interested in buying, but then they look in on your listing and wow, those are some really neat ones. I love Winnie the Pooh. I'll put those on the wall. Most of those things are done for mounts on walls, or for collectors, or people like me that would maybe keep vintage Alice in Wonderland illustrations for art ideas, or to recreate them at some point. So that's the aspect of it that's the newer books, post 1900. Vintage-wise, again, you want key ones. Now, most of the ones I sell that are torn out of books are just going to be steel plate engravings or copper plate. Copper plate are earlier. Steel is later. The process to do them back then with copper was softer, and it's easier to engrave in for it doing. And they're doing in reverse too, so keep that in mind when you do it. So copper was available and easily done back in the day. Steel was harder to cut, so once the technology advanced, they got away from copper because they wear out quicker. Steel lasts longer, so they went to steel. So that's the difference. It's just a time age. So when I say copper or steel, they're both basically the same thing. One's usually an earlier process. Copper, steel is newer, at least from my basic knowledge. I don't know the eras or the dates they did them on. Usually you can semi-tell. The better ones are usually ones that were printed earlier on that same engraved plate. You know, usually the first runs off of a plate are the best. Sometimes not, because there may be an issue and they may have corrected it later on, but for the most part, the earliest ones are the best. Engravings in general have been collected for 500-600 years. Albert Dürer is a artist. He's one that I've, you know, just been dumbfounded in. He's one of my favorites. He was active in Germany in around 1500. He has some illustrations that are so photorealistic for the time and age. It's just a phenomenal thing to think that it happened back in 1500. They're comparable to anything Norman Rockwell or any of these photorealistic artists are doing today. He is one of my all-time favorite artists. I've seen originals in museums and only went to those museums to see his work. So I love other artwork, Peter Paul Rubens or something like that, but if you get an engraving from him in a book engraving, a book steel press, they were actually probably done by him. They would have been handed off to another binder and then embedded into a book at some other point. But one of his can be worth $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. So you've got to pay attention to it. He usually signed them with like a glyph of an A with a D underneath it. There's a couple different versions of it, but again, that's just one example. Most of the stuff that's worth money and I mess with is almost exclusively engraved prints. There's etchings and other things, but the engraved ones are the ones you want. Don't waste your time on buying books that just have everyday objects or illustrations in them unless they are engraved prints with that impressed mark, with the raised ink, or at least that impressed mark around the edges of it. So that's what I personally look for. That's key to what I personally do with this as well too. So I don't mess with most other ones in that. There may again be some value with other ones, engraved ones, especially portraits of people, famous people that are engraved. Actual engraves are worth something. Or the maps, as I said. Those are the key ones that I mess with. So fantasy artwork like Peter Pan, for newer ones post 1900, pre 1900, pretty much only exclusively I mess with the etchings. Very, very rare cases I might walk away with a book that has hundreds of like Civil War people in it or something that aren't necessarily engravings, but it's sheer quantity and I'm only paying a couple bucks. So I might get 20 or 30 bucks out of something like that. But for the most part, don't mess with the other ones unless they're engraved, or the ones I mentioned, or somewhere along that line. Tarzan, for example, will still sell. You know, some of the Mars ones, or Edgar Rice Burroughs, some of the other ones that he did too are worthwhile as well. So anyway, but that's about it in those. Let's see, I think I had a couple more questions. If you're new to the group, again, post some questions in there. I'll try to answer at least one of your questions each month. I'll do at least 1 or 2 videos just on questions. This would be the second one for this month. But again, I'm going to have another video. I'm always going to have at least a video, even if I'm not talking about the questions. So there'll be at least 2 or 3 videos up every month, just here on Patreon. Let's see here. I think I've answered a lot of the other ones. Another one that comes up, and it's a couple of people ask this as well too. Do I list items in several categories? No. Do not spend the extra money. Now, if it's something you know 100% is going to sell, maybe you want to for a little extra viewership if you're doing it, like say as an auction. But I never ever pay the extra fee to list in more than one category. I'll list it for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and then switch categories after that point. That way I'm saving the money. And as long as you're using keywords, for the most part, it doesn't matter, because most people are searching on eBay are just going to be looking for a specific item. They're not going to go centering it on a specific category unless it's a flooded category and it's too hard to tell. There are some that work that way, but again, I still don't list in 2 separate categories. And that was answered. That was several people had that same one. And again, another person brought up if I could film at a live auction. That's a little touchy subject. You won't see many people doing that. There may be some legalities to it. And again, I haven't had the chance to check with it. My auction guy just doesn't want to mess with the time, and he's not going to go out of his way to look into it. You know, I'm not going to get onto it with him, and I'm not going to bug him on it. If I can figure out the information and can bona fide it to him, maybe we'll go from there. But anyway. And Robert Reagan asked here about a top 10 bolo list. I don't really have a top 10 bolo list. I look for everything I can. I'll check out every item in the store. I don't care what it is, even if I never sold it before, never thought it would be worth value, until I realize whether it does or doesn't have value in my head. That way, when you go in the future, you're not going to have to mess with that. I can give you some examples of things that I always look for, and let's say you want to know if there's a place that has stuff you might look for. These are the things I would ask for if I called them on the phone. I would always ask if they had paper and postcards specifically. Sheet music I would ask for. Do they sell used books, antique books, records, militaria items as well? You know, those are the key ones that I always look for. Toys as well. So those are like 6 or 7 that I always ask for. When I call somebody. If there's an auction going on, I'll ask them for those specific items. Usually if they have those items, they're going to have other things that I would be interested in as well too. So I can't say a specific bolo that I look for. You specifically mentioned like going to a thrift store. I don't go to many thrift stores at all anymore here. My market for thrift stores is gone. If I had to live off of thrift stores, I would be on the street right now in this area. So again, you have to know your market and change up when something doesn't work like that. So there is no Savers here anymore. They both closed. Goodwill is terrible. Salvation Army is terrible. There's a couple stores here and there that are worth going to, but for the most part, no. I don't mess with clothing, so I'm not worried about that anymore. If, for say, I'm at a store and there's jackets, I always check out the jackets. That's number one area that I can always sell. Jackets pretty much always sell, even above and beyond shirts, and they're almost always exclusively what I mess with would be leather jackets like this vintage one. This is a 60s, 70s, like the Fight Club style jacket that I wear. This is something that I bought because it fits me though, so I don't worry if I don't sell it later on. If I'm, you know, I'm not into it or I get a better one, then I might sell this one at some point. But I buy things that I like to start with, so all the antiques I talk about are things that I like as well too. But if you're asking for those specific items, you should be safe to find an overall good mix of collectibles if they have those items. If they have all of those items, I would definitely go to wherever that is, or I would look for all those items. Again, it's just, there should never be a concern to be locked into a specific 10 items or 20 items or 100 items. Anything out there could carry value. I find stuff daily that I would have never thought carried a high value on that routinely does sell for a lot of money. So don't confine yourself to any one list or anything. Broaden it as broadly as you can when you're sourcing. Write down information when you go to sources too to make sure that you're finding stuff there. Let's say you went to 5 or 6 stops in one day, which is your best bet. Tie them together, draw out a plan so you're not wasting time driving all over the place. Hit ones that are close together at the same time. Make a note on what you find there and how much money you're making off of these places. Don't leave it to chance or to your memory to say, hey, yeah, I think I got that there. When you go to 4 or 5 places and you come home with 40, 50 items, you might not remember where each one came from, or you might not want to track it all down either. So keep that in thought when you're doing this. Take notes and records of where you go and what's the best source to go to. This way you can cut out the stores that don't make you any money. You'll remember week after week that, no, I never find anything here. Or go to those same stores different days of the week. Maybe there's only certain days they put stuff out. Or ask them when they put stuff out, what's the best time to come to see new merchandise? Most people will tell you. So anyway, hopefully that answers that a little bit here. I don't have a favorite kind of thrift store, honestly. Most of the time, Savers are fairly decent, but again, they look stuff up these days too. Most everyone does. You know, Goodwill has their own auctions on their own sites that aren't related to, you know, doing that. Some of them list stuff online in many different sources. So church sales I always do go to. Those are usually better than that. And I also had questions on glassware. I don't mess with glassware, and I'm not going to do any recommendations on glassware. Glassware, to some extent, is a dime a dozen, so you're just not going to get a ton of it. It's not going to sell for a fortune. It can be chipped or damaged. You could miss something very easily, like on a rim or a flea bite, that just kills the value. I break maybe 10% of the glassware I get over time just from sheer being here so long. So I've pretty much, we've trashed out all of my glassware. I have maybe a couple of bins of small items, shot glasses, a few plates and things like that I know will sell, that I've sold before and have a routine selling history on them. I don't like messing with shipping out China or anything like that either. So your call on that. I probably would not be the one to ask on that question here. I try to keep it the stuff that I can store stacked high as can be, or I can, you know, put in a drawer and then have like drawers that slide in and out and have multiple things filled in that drawer. So, you know, that's what I try to keep my stuff to. I look at and avoid things that will occupy space or will be damaging or high return rates. Again, with clothing, it takes up a lot of space. So I avoid all of that. If it's something I can flip and I know it's a huge high-end item, like a Loope or something, you know, I'm going to buy it, of course. But for the most part, I don't mess with most glassware. Depression glass, stuff like that. They've made so many reproductions. Unless you're good at knowing the reproductions, you could buy the wrong item. And it happens even to collectors, even to dealers who sell this stuff sometimes get skunked on it. So my wife collects Sharon Cabbage Rose pattern. It's pink depression glass. But there's just so many repros out there. Shipping and everything, if you sell it in big lots, it weighs so much. And selling single plates that you might make $10 on or in that range, it's just not worth my time. You know, if it works for you, that's fine. But I would say you're going to have to buy a lot of price guides. You're going to have to talk to a lot of people to get the right stuff. Again, there's some that are worth some money. Back in the day, before, say, 76 or in that era, you used to be able to sell like Shirley Temple blue depression glass and pink depression glass. It had her picture embedded up, but there's so many reproductions of those out there. They look so close to the original. The glass even has that same look. Without a loop and seeing a bunch of them, you just can't tell. Size can be a difference, and you can tell by the size, but if you don't have an original to compare it to, you may miss the size difference because it's so slight in some of these items. So again, you're going to have to be cautious. That's something I can't help you with, unfortunately. Just because it hasn't worked out for me. We did it in the past. You know, we had shelves worth of glassware up there, and I know there's many people that make a ton of money on it. I am not an expert on it. I won't recommend it. I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction ever. So that's really my answer on that one here. Again, Carl and Sandra Keys asked on the same thing on postcards with ironing out. Don't do it. Bruno, I did have the video up yesterday on specifically on silver marks. That site is the bomb. 925-1000.com. That is the site. That's the only site you should have to worry about for silverware in general. The other ones I think I touched on there fairly well. Hopefully that gave you some answers. If you have some follow-up questions, be my guest to put them down there and I can delve into those specifically. But that site has been around for like a decade. It's the best one out here. It beats any of the price guides or actual books that you will find on that subject too. So I think, Diego, I've touched on yours on the transitioning. So again, anybody has any other questions, please feel free to add them in here at any point. And again, many people had questions on cost of goods. Last video here, I did post on that. The one before last, actually. Last one was on long tail items. All the sheets I have up there are what I use pretty much exclusively for anything I do, including tracking my income, my profits, and what I have at the end of the day. So those are the sheets I use. They're all in Excel. They're all copies of them attached here in Patreon for you to download free and clear anytime you want. They can all be altered. If you have questions on how to set it up for your specific needs, you're welcome to put a question on that as well with the items that you want in there. And I don't have a problem with throwing some more sheets together with those specific columns that you would wish to have if you're not good on setting up Excel. I'll be also fine with doing a little better in-depth video on actually how to change the Excel spreadsheets step by step, if that would help for some folks too. Excel, obviously, you have to buy. So if you're not into it or it's not your thing, completely understood. So again, just holler out if that would be helpful to you. So any questions, again, for you, if you're new, shoot them out here. Again, I'm going to try to answer them to the honest best of my ability. So I do make mistakes, so everything I say isn't gold across the board. So anyway, we're going to now go into touching base on the silks and things along that line, give you a better idea on fixing up something else this week here too. So it's not going to be a long add-on here, but it's going to help you out as well, and help you judge on these items. But we're going to go over and we're going to cut to another scene here, and I'm going to go into tobacco silks and silks in general and show you some things you can do with that as well. Okay, so today I'm going to also talk about silks. You're not going to run into these a lot, but when you do, you're going to find them in various condition. You're going to find them where they're wrinkled. You can see just the overall condition and wrinkle. Now, they can be cleaned up and they can be ironed as well too. Let me show you how these usually turn up too, so you will know what to look for. Now, I spent $800 on these, and mostly what I see them, they're going to be stitched. to a pillowcase usually. This is usually how I find them. And then it's just a matter of taking X-Acto blade and you're going to cut them away. Cut the string very carefully. Pull them out very carefully. That's literally all I do. All these can be carefully plucked out of there. It's going to leave little holes as well. But with ironing these, as I said, I ironed some items. This is one of them. I can remove almost all of the issues other than the staining on these. Like let's for instance, here's Queen Helena of Italy. You can see it's kind of messed up at the bottom. It has the loose stitches. It's wrinkled. You can really see the holes because it's raised in the fabric. It's raised from the fabric, especially right here, this corner there. You can see how wrinkled that is. Now this is one right here that I've actually ironed. Now can you see how clean and crisp it is? I've actually carefully trimmed the edges off the bottom. Most people will do that as long as it's in the dead area and it's not going into the design. But this is a cleaned up one. You can just totally see how smooth and clear and crisp it is. And it looked just like this with the damage and the issues prior to me cleaning it up. And again, I've ironed each and every one of these. I've got a big stack of these that I've already ironed and put up right here, as you can see. These are the money ones. Again, these were all stitched really awfully to a pillowcase, just like I show you here. It was even folded up and shoved. Again, I spent a ton of money on these, but the quantity of them is horrendous. So even with the stitchery, I will at least double or triple my money on this, make a couple grand at the worst case scenario. But again, they all can be ironed. In fact, I've got an iron right here. Let me move some of these ones that I've already addressed out of the way, and I will show you ironing one of these. They're not as fragile as they look. Majority of these, though, don't hold a high value. It is the sports-related ones that will get you your most money. Now, you see I've got Native American ones and stuff in this lot, too. These will sell, but nowhere near what the other ones will sell for. These will all be ironed. You'll get off the little crinkles and the creases. It'll look so much better once they're ironed, and sometimes these get lots of creases, lots of crinkles. There's even a way to remove some of the stains if you want to mess with it that much. I don't usually go to that extreme, but for the most part, I will iron every one of these right off the bat. Again, there's just some examples of it. Now, here's one. Maybe in another future video when I do a bunch of these, I'll show you how to clean this up. You can see the awful stains. This one hasn't been listed. If this is cleaned up, once it's ironed and I unroll the edges, as you can see, the edge on this one is kind of rolled, so you'd have to unroll it and then iron it out. This one's like a $60 or $70 one, so, you know, it's worth spending the time to fix it up. You know, some of them do look dingy, corners bent and things like that, but let's get the iron over here, and we're just going to look at a couple of them. Now, these you can do on a typical ironing board, literally. It's my small size iron, just like I've shown you. I always use a travel iron on these, always. Instantly you can see how it's pretty much almost hidden part of the stitchery, and if you keep doing this, you can literally improve the quality immensely. Now again, you could trim off that edge on the bottom. I'm not going to on this one because it's not worth a ton of money, but as you can see too, even on the edge up there, it will get out that crease. You're going to have to hold it a little bit. You'll probably have to flatten it. You'll have to go back and forth a few times. But again, this is on, I believe I'm just over medium. Yeah, it's just over medium. I would never use steam on these whatsoever. Never steam them. If it's a big stiff crease, again, these are fairly tough, believe it or not. So it's not going to hurt them. It's really hot now. But most of the issues are gone. I can go back over the edges again on this and really press on it hard. That's what you're doing. Press the force on it. This one's a little different than the other ones. Press the force on it. Can you literally see the difference in that? I mean, I can see it from here. That little curl will be gone once it's flattened out inside a pack with a bunch of these on top of it. But now it's a completely sellable. The holes have been severely minimized that were the stitch holes. Again, it has the same stitch holes as all the other ones. It's nice. It's glossy. It really brings it back to shape. Let's go over this one here too. Now this is Queen Elizabeth of Serbia. Let me hold it a little better here. Can you see how instantly the crease is almost gone already, and that was almost a complete horizontal crease on it. We can move on up to here. Just be careful when you do it. Always pick it back up to make sure it's not getting stuck. Do not hold it on the face of these for very long. That's the key here. That's what could happen. It could pick up on you. So literally hold it like this. If you're going to flatten it for any length of time, flip it over and do it from the back. That is the key. You'll see little pieces of fabric and stuff too, but again, you can trim off the excess if it's into the border section, but don't trim off anything if it's been in the actual image section itself. But even just looking at the back and looking at it, it's almost there. A couple more good presses and I'll get that last little bit out of there. But you can definitely see the difference. This is one of those items that's safe, as long as you're not holding it in one spot where you're going to burn the silk. Now, you can do this with silk ties. You can do this with silk pillowcases, any of that stuff. I would always recommend carefully ironing out anything that's silk. Shirts as well, too. Now, you can iron any of that stuff fairly well. And just as this is a perfect example. Again, it's now in a sellable. You can almost not even see the sew holes. That's why I say unstitch them right off the bat. You're going to get a lot less for them if they are stitched still, and if you don't iron. Let's zoom in here so you can see it just a little better here. There we go. In fact, why don't I get one where you can see the stitch holes a lot better, just so you can see the vast difference on it. Let me see here. Literally, the holes are very visible until you iron them. Once you iron them, it tightens the fabric back up, and those holes almost shrink to being non-existent. You still want to list that it has some pinholes, but in all honesty, an average collector, even some of the high-end ones, aren't going to be bothered by the way it looks now, because again, you can't see the stitch holes. Every one of these, including this one, had at least, say, 10 or so stitch holes on any given side, and now they're almost non-existent. Let's just look at one more here. Now, this is a real good example of a pretty well wrinkled one. Let's see if you can see all the wrinkles and stuff in it. It's pretty well wrinkled up here, so let's just give it a quick go over. Just a quick one too, even. We're not even holding it very often, or very hard on this one. And then you can literally use the tip and fold it over. And as you do it, just keep doing this to it. This is just like the paper. There's a lot to this that can, be repaired. Just be careful. Curl up all the edges the way they are. This one's damaged on the side, so it's not going to be worth a ton of money the way it is. It'll go in a lot either way, but that's fine. For the most part, it's fairly well improved just over what you just saw a minute ago. You could see the stitching holes, so to get rid of them, press really hard, smash the fabric back into place. This is literally what I do to any silk I get. Every time I get it, any one of them. It's almost an immediate improvement over what you just saw a minute ago. It looks pretty trashed out, but again, this is one of those items you can repair. This one's too bad. It's shortened already, so I'm not going to trim off any of these. But, $5-10 out of something that most people would discard because they're stuck together, they're stitched or something like that. So this is just a touch on this. Again, there's just so much things you can do to it. And as I said, this is the money maker. I bought the entire lot just because of this. The rest are just pocket change. These are going to be my money, and you can see they all look nice. They all had crinkles, creases. A couple of them maybe I could have ironed a little more, but these were 10 times better now than they were before. You can just see the quality on them. And again, these looked just like this here. The same quality when you just saw it. They were ironed out. They were improved. The creases and all, they just come right out. Even like stuff like that little divot there will be almost gone. Just in general, it just improves them immensely when you iron them out. So that's about it on this. Hopefully that gave you some ideas. Again, unstitch them first. Use an X-Acto blade, not a seam ripper when you do it. You want to be careful so you're not stretching the fabric when you're removing the stitchery. So In some cases, people will use a small embroidery pair of scissors, which I have and I use occasionally, where the end of the scissors is scooped. I don't have one right handy, but getting them off is the easiest part. Ironing them is the careful part you have to take care of. Just don't stretch any more than you have to when you remove them from the actual fabric pillowcase or whatever they're stitched to. And again, almost all of the time that I find these, I find them stitched. It's very rare that you're going to find a stack like this unless someone's cleaned them up like I have. You know, I've got like, I think I paid maybe like $2 a piece on average for all the ones I got. There's hundreds of these that I got. So, you know, it's a good investment. I mean, there's different sizes. There's different series these were issued in. These are all circa, say, 1909, 1910, 1911. So, anyway, that's what I have. Well, there you go. That's a little bit on the silks that I have and what we're going to do with those and profits and things like that. Next month, I will be going into doing some more repairs and showing you how to do surface repairs on some other items as well too, just to give you some more ideas. There's so many things you can do to improve the quality of items as long as you state that that's what's being done. But that's what I have for you today.